Namaskar. In this episode of Dil Se, we'll talk about the tectonic shift that has taken place in global politics, actually since January 2025. It seems to me, and that's my own opinion, that we are moving away from multilateralism to unilateralism, not even bilateralism. We are confiscating, or in the beginning of the confiscation of democracy. It seems as if might is right. We're talking about annexing territories. President Trump is talking about annexing territories. He's talking about shifting populations, shifting the Palestinians to Somalia, to Somaliland, to Sudan, annexing Greenland, raising tariffs, giving up the old relationship that he had with the NATO countries, moving towards proximity with Russia. And it seems to me, and we'll talk about this today, that there is behind this an economic enterprise that is behind all this. Economic enterprise of the United States of America and Trump's idea of that enterprise. He talks about converting the Gaza Strip into some Riviera. He's talking about protecting the security interests of the United States by annexing Greenland. He's talking about, in his negotiations, not negotiations, but in his diktats to Zelensky, he is more interested in that economic agreement for the rare earth minerals, without guaranteeing any kind of security. So the nature of the world order that has existed since 1945 till date seems to have taken, as I said, a tectonic shift. And what are the implications of that globally? What are the implications of that as far as India is concerned and other parts of the world? We have three, I think, of the best brains in this country with me today, who are familiar with these issues, who have actually traversed through these years where there was some semblance of a global order, and who now realize as to what the kind of quality of shift that has taken place and what it means to the rest of the world and to India, of course. Shyam Saran, thank you very much for being here. You have been our Foreign Secretary. You've been the chairman of the India's National Security Advisory Board. You've been associated, and you've been in Beijing, in Tokyo, in Geneva. You were Joint Secretary of the PM Office in 91-92, Special Envoy of India in the nuclear deal, and the Chief Negotiator for Climate Change, Sherpa for the G8 and the G5, and you've written, of course, a Padma Bhushan. You've written a wonderful book also, How India Sees the World, Kautilya to 21st Century. So you've been through all this, and thank you very much for being here.
My pleasure.
Shivshankar, thank you for being here. The kind of lineage you have, very few people in this country do. Your father was ambassador, retired as ambassador to Yugoslavia. Your grandfather was foreign secretary. Your great-grandfather was the only Malayali to be president of the Congress party. Your uncle was also foreign secretary. And you have been, what should I say? You have been in the midst of a lot of events that have happened within the neighborhood and in the hotspots of the world. China, Pakistan, you've been High Commissioner to Pakistan, Ambassador to China, Israel, Sri Lanka, and of course, while I was in government, you really took forward the Indo-US nuclear deal and went to the suppliers group to give us the kind of support that we needed. And in 2010, you were regarded as one of the 100 most powerful people in the world. Well, that's what Time magazine said. And you've written this wonderful book on Inside the Making of Indian Foreign Policy in 2016 and India and Asian Geopolitics, Past and Present, published in 2021, the second one and the earlier one in 2016. Thank you very much for being here. Raja, you have distinguished academician, journalist, foreign policy analyst, and your move from nuclear physics to international relations has been quite phenomenal. He's done an MA in nuclear physics. And you are a visiting research professor at the Institute of South Asian Studies in the National University of Singapore. And you've had, in your illustrious career, you've been the founding director of Carnegie India in New Delhi, professor of South Asian Studies at the JNU, and a member of the National Security Advisory Board. And of course, you've written several books, Shaping of India's New Foreign Policy, Impossible Allies, Nuclear India, United States and Global Order, and several others. So we have three extraordinary people, one academic and a journalist and a research fellow, and the two who have taken this country forward during difficult times. So thank you very much. Shyam, what do you think? Has there been a tectonic shift?
Well, there is no doubt that it is a tectonic shift. I don't think we have seen anything like this before. All the familiar anchors that we have been sort of familiar with, all those anchors are being knocked down virtually on a daily basis. So this is going to be a very uncertain, very unpredictable global environment. And I think it is almost as if every country will have to be for itself, decide what it wants to do and how to navigate this very strange kind of a geopolitical terrain that we are facing. But I would say this, that we have to recognize that this is not a maverick, Trump, as if he's a, a very odd, strange kind of a figure, and things will settle down maybe after 4 years when he's no longer there. It is a tectonic shift precisely for the reason that what he represents is something deeper. A deeper change that is taking place, by the way, not only in the United States of America. It is not specific only to the United States of America. I think it is only an acute, more acute expression of what we have been seeing happening across the world. In common parlance, you may say it is a kind of a lurch to the right, or what you mentioned, as the unilateralism that we see on display, or the use of power in a very, very, shall I say, I mean, power has always been used, but perhaps, the gloves are off in a sense. So this is a very new kind of a world in which we are living, but I think it is important for us to understand the deeper, maybe ideological, maybe social, maybe economic underpinnings of this change which is taking place. I think that is important.
Yeah, but I think I agree with you, but I think there has to be in the history of any moment a tipping point. And I think, and this is my personal opinion, and I'll ask you, Shivshankar, that tipping point was the election of President Trump and what he's been saying. What do you say?
Was the re-election.
Yes.
Because I think Trump 2.0 is very different from Trump 2.1.
True.
I
I think he's the tipping point for all this.
Because this time he has a majority, he's come in organized, he's come with a broad coalition, ranging from billionaires and techno-anarchists and all the way down to the deprived, those who feel left out. So his populist appeal still remains, but he has, and he's a result of many things that have happened. After all, if you look at it, look backwards, the Biden administration didn't change his China policy in fundamentals.
Yes.
They didn't go back to WTO or they stayed protectionist. And in many ways, I think what he represents, as Shyam rightly said, is he personifies that historic shift. But he does it in a way which catches eyeballs. So therefore, I think everyone ascribes it just to him, but he's not a lone wolf. Again, as Shyam said, he's not some lone wolf who's got his way and, when he goes, it's going to change. I don't think there's any going back.
There's nobody else talking about annexation. Nobody else is talking about shifting.
Yes, but if you look at the history of military interventions, all the great powers in the last 2 decades have been using military interventions. We saw it in the Himalayas. You've seen it in the South China Sea. You see it everywhere. You saw, what was happening in Syria? What was Turkey doing? You've seen what has Israel done to remake the Middle East. Everybody's trying their luck. What is Rwanda trying in Congo? So military intervention, you might call it annexation, you might call it whatever, but it's become, even Armenia lost Nagorno-Karabakh. So I think what he represents is really, it's become very visible because now it's the US, and the US catches everybody's eyeballs. But actually what he represents is a whole series of American isolationism, yes, but populism, which is spread across, a shift to the right in the political process in most countries.
Right.
You've seen also protectionism and beggar thy neighbor economic policies across the board. And what is when the Europeans say we'll do a carbon border adjustment mechanism, what are they doing? It's protectionism.
True.
Against the rest of the world. So he represents many trends that we've seen coming, but he actually brings them to a head. Now that the US has signed on to them, and will presumably do it for the next 4 years, I don't think there's any going back. This is a historic shift.
You think there's no going back?
No, I don't think so. I think, as Shankar was saying, the intimations of big change started in 2016 when he became president. In fact, much of the anti-China policy, the Indo-Pacific, the Quad, everything you can trace back to the first administration. And then Biden came, largely persisted with that policy. On the economics as well and trade, they largely kept up this, that you needed to de-risk from China. And the need to rebuild alliances. So that the big difference is, Biden tried to manage the changes or the challenges to US through building alliances. This man is saying, I don't care for alliances. Right. Even the closest allies, Brits, Canadians. I don't know if you saw JD Vance called Britain the first Muslim country with nuclear weapons. So I think the utter contempt for the liberal politics, I think that's what the fight is, not between countries. The American right today sees what's happening in Europe, what's happening in the closest allies as something unacceptable, and that they're going to use whatever they have to change that. So I would say three broad changes. I think one, in terms of the great power relations, the attempt to make up with with Russia. We've seen that before. After all, 1971, where the US moved closer to China after refusing to recognize them. Then we also saw the Sino-Soviet rift in the same period. So I think those changes in that sense, what he's doing is not quite dramatic. What he's doing in the multilateral institutions, as you rightly said, there was always a strain in the Republican Party that said, look, we don't care for multilateralism. Yeah. And we shouldn't let our sovereignty, sometimes sounds like Indians, I can't let multilateralism undermine our sovereignty. But I think now the attack on the global institutions, liberal institutions, is full-fledged and a determination to change that. For us, I think the biggest change is really in the nature of capitalism and the nature of the global economic order. So what he's doing internally, I think what he's talking about, three things internally, that you've got to dismantle the administrative state, that you need to reduce the bureaucracy, you need to downsize government, and you need to give a free hand to technology companies. So deregulation, downsizing of bureaucracy, and unleash the energies of the people. Linked to this, I think it's quite fascinating that you have the Secretary of Commerce says, look, we might almost abolish income tax. Now, if you say that to any economist, you would think that's crazy. For 100 years, income tax has been the dominant way. But I think these guys are serious about it.
Yeah,
that use tariffs
Dr. Swamy has been saying this for India as well for a long time.
Yeah, use tariffs to bridge the gap and bring down personal income taxes. So that again, how far they'll go, we will see. But I think the core change is the idea of open markets, which has been the established wisdom, first in 1945, but in a far more sweeping way in 1991. Open markets, open movement for capital, that was their sense of globalization. And he's saying, look, that didn't work for the Americans. We're going to change that structure, both on trade and finance. Now they're talking about taxing capital as well, not just goods, tariffs on, because I think the core idea there, that the high value of the dollar has undermined American competitiveness.
Yes.
Therefore, how do you bring back, some would say it's a vision of the 1950s and 60s, more manufacturing, jobs in the US, whether it's possible or not. I think that is the aim, and that's why they're quite willing to live with the shock and the stock market falling.
But manufacturing and technology don't go hand in hand, if you ask me. It's technology that's going to actually control the rest of the world. And the the Googles and the Amazons are going to control the world. And, but move away from that, and I'll come to you on this. That to me it seems, if you really look at Ukraine, look at the resources of Ukraine. It has the largest lithium reserves in Europe, which is crucial for battery production in electronic vehicles and renewable energy storage. It has significant titanium production, key material in aerospace and defense industries. Its uranium reserves are strategically important for European energy security. Vast deposits of iron ore and coal make it the world's top producers of steel. It is the granary of Europe, contributes nearly 10% of global wheat exports. It accounts for 40% of sunflower oil exports and a major corn supplier. I mean, this is the kind of wealth that there is in Ukraine, which is why he's talking about this agreement with Zelensky, and he's not talking about security. So is it not a fact, and this is also true of what Putin is saying, in terms of his collaboration with the United States. You come here, there are vast reserves of rare earths, right, in this great nation. Even in Ukraine, in occupied parts, there are vast reserves. Come and collaborate with us. So don't you think that this is pure economics at play, aggrandizement at play, and only thinking about what you can gain in that process because might is right? I just want your comments on that.
I don't think I would go that far.
Okay.
That it's only the economic,
No, it has political implications, but I'm just saying.
I think it is a means to an end, because even if you look at what he's trying to do in Ukraine, many of those reserves are frankly not proven yet. They are, estimated to have these very large reserves that you're talking about. Even if we are looking at US control over those resources, exploiting them is going to take a long period of time, will require probably a lot of capital investment. So the returns are not immediate. He wants immediate results. That is the way he looks at it. He's not looking really at the long term in that sense. So there is that economic dimension is very much there. What has happened is that on the one hand there are his personal predilections, but what I think we were both trying to say, that there is a certain kind of ideological underpinning to this. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if you look at, for example, what mentioned about, that US dollar has been, overvalued, right, and therefore a lot of the industry has gone away from the US and this must change. So now there is a talk of a Mar-a-Lago Accord, like the Plaza Accord of the past. How do we bring the rate of the dollar down, but at the same time not lose the dollar's place of the dollar as an international currency. Correct. So there are various contradictory kind of objectives which are being floated around,
which are not well thought out.
There are different kinds of thought streams. I think that's the way to look at it. But I think what his own thinking is, what we talked about, I mean, there is this whole business of like a sphere of influence thinking. It's like almost a primordial kind of a, exercise of power.
Right.
Not that we have not had exercise of power in this manner, as Shankar said, but it was cloaked in some kind of principle, some kind of moral,
semblance of morality.
Those pretensions are off. So this is power for its own sake. If I am powerful, I must display.
That's why I said might is right.
Yes, exactly.
Survival of the fittest.
So it is a somewhat more complicated than merely an economic argument, but the economic argument is certainly there. The ideological part, I think, is important because when the vice president went to the Munich Security Conference and the speech that he made there, it was like a war cry, and he's going and meeting the AfD, chairperson, for example. So that ideological element is very prominent.
No doubt about it.
And I think there is therefore a sense here that there is maybe some kind of ideological affinity that exists between, say, Prime Minister Modi and Trump, and this will somehow see us through. Up to a point, maybe, but I think one should not be very, very hopeful that purely because of that.
That we'll talk about later, but at the moment I just want to ask you this, in this conversation. Even ideology ultimately has to have a goal. And what would the goal would be? Economic.
Well,
and sphere of influence.
You know, Fauci tells a wonderful story about when, you remember when Trump said in the White House press room that drink bleach for COVID.
Yes.
Fauci was standing next to him.
Yeah.
Immediately said, look, that's anecdotal, there's no scientific proof. And then they went to the Oval Office. Fauci thought, now I've lost my job. I've just contradicted the president in public, right? Instead, Trump is looking at 3 screens on TV saying, wow, look at those ratings. Isn't it great? We're even better than the serials. Right. No blow up, no nothing. Fauci kept his job. I think we're dealing with an opportunist who looks at things purely from a selfish point of view. So I wouldn't look for some great integrating principle in what they're doing.
Or great ideology.
Oh, yeah, I think he's doing many things. They could contradict each other. Some will work, some will not. But I think they will be practical to the extent that they fit with the balance of power in the world today, which has changed, right? In the Cold War, between the Soviets and the Americans, they had about 80% of world GDP and about the same proportion of world military power. Right. And Warsaw Pact, NATO, if you add them up. Today, if you look at China and the US, and forget about alliances and so on now, they're less than 50% of world GDP and about the same proportion of military power. There's a whole world out there.
Right.
There's only so many things they can do. There's a lot of scavenging that can be done. As you said, Ukraine, wherever. But frankly, if you want rare earths, there are other places where are much easier to get them. Where do the Chinese get them? Chinese process over 90% of the rare earths on Earth, but they actually mine less than 30. Most of it they get out of Africa
from outside,
and Latin
they
America.
Go out to get them.
US itself is a very
that's a reserve
large
for them in China.
Is, you know, so
US
I don't
itself
think,
has.
Yes.
So I don't think lithium is, but it's a combination of things. What Vance was saying is like calling for regime change in his allies in Europe. Yeah. I mean, that's what he was doing. So for me, it's a much more mixed sort of picture. But I think you can predict some of the results. I mean, I think Trump has a very good chance of making China great again. I think the alliances...
Why do you say that?
Well, because many of these policies actually open the door for China. In Southeast Asia, for instance, after you've seen what happened to Ghani in Afghanistan, what happened to Zelensky, I mean, how many people are going to trust the US and rely on the US? I think you can see the nuclear order breaking down. Can you rely on US extended deterrence?
Putin has just said that, you know, we are ready to reduce 50% of your nuclear if the United States agrees. I just heard Putin say that.
No, he's been actually, it's one of the interesting things.
But he's shaking the regime up completely
by
doing this. Right. Whether he has a plan or not doesn't really matter. It's the
I doubt if he has a
plan. We will have to deal with. And I think he's shaking it up across the board. Nuclear, certainly, as Raja will tell you.
No, I think, you know, one of the crazy things about like Reagan was, say, one of the most militarist presidents, but at the same time, he was ready to sign off nuclear weapons with Gorbachev at the time. Yeah. So this guy has actually said it, if you see his Davos speech, you know, he said, look, why are we having so many nuclear weapons? Yeah. And he says, I want to talk to the Chinese. The Chinese are not there yet with us, but they're catching up, so we need to have a new arrangement. And the Russians love this, of this parity, sitting with the Russians, talking about global arms control. So Russian tease, it actually works for them. And Chinese are not going to accept it, of course. And the more interesting thing, he's also said, look, there's too much money being spent on defense. We need to cut defense expenditures. Right. So I think there is a crazy, in the right wing, a restrainer kind of argument that we shouldn't waste our resources. But
right wing normally invest more in defense.
That's the thing. There is actually, in the right and the left, I mean, there is an interesting convergence where they say, look, the US is so blessed, why are we messing around with the world, sending our boys to die everywhere? But whether that will prevail or the more assertive unilateralism. But I think the biggest change, I would say, in terms of what we see in terms of the US effect, the US still retains 26% of the global GDP, while the balance of power has changed. I think what we're seeing happen is US still has the capacity to force some change in the international system. which is exactly, I think, they're trying to do on the trading system, increasingly probably on the financial system, as Shyam Saran was saying, the Mar-a-Lago Accord of reducing American debt, of reducing the value of dollar. So I think that will be far more consequential than many of the smaller things or irritating things he does, because I think all of us will have to be prepared for that structural change in the international economic system. So that's where I think the real challenge is for us.
Where does Europe stand in all this?
This is where I think it will be not just, as he said, a fundamental structural change in the international economy, but it will also lead, if Europe feels you can't rely on the Americans anymore, where do they go? They turn to Russia. Germany, it's the instinctive historical ally, actually, and to China.
Yes.
So what I would expect is, as a result of this, you will see attempts by Europe to increase, when they say increase Europe's strategic autonomy, increase Europe's ability to defend itself and so on, it also means trying to bring down the level of hostility with Russia and trying to build an economic alternative.
They're about arming Europe. They're talking about, defense initiatives.
But they will try very hard, I think.
Rearm Europe. These are what they're talking about.
But that they
don't have the money, if you ask me.
There are limits to that. You saw Zeitenwelde, the former Scholz, the former German chancellor. He had spoken of a fundamental shift of raising. Nothing much has happened in the last 2 years. $100 billion he was going to. So I think for me the logical conclusion, so we're going to see shifts in great power relations as a consequence of this, of the uncertainty that he's introduced into the system. And some of those, I think, those consequences, I think, work for the others.
But Shyam, the Europeans were having a great time because they didn't have to spend defending Europe. So they could actually, through the liberal ideology, provide the kind of services, social services, that no other part of the world could provide, right? Now, if Trump is backing off, Europe will be in great economic distress.
They already are. So,
I mean, Germany is growing at 0.3%.
So Germany says, oh, if we wish we could go back to a time where we could get gas from Russia.
Yeah, exactly.
We could get a market in China, and we could get security from the United States. That was the best that could happen, and they would really manage to profit from that. That world is gone.
Yeah.
So I think Europe, whether you like it or not, even if there is some positive change, maybe you just had the NATO Secretary General go to Washington. It seems as if he had a good meeting.
And what did Trump say to the Secretary General? He said, look, we have to take over Greenland because we have got some people there. We could put more American soldiers. And we need security from Russia and China.
He said, oh, there were people who didn't want him to become Secretary General. I made him Secretary.
Now, on the one hand, you're getting close to Russia. On the one hand, you're getting want to be close to China, having to deal with Xi. And on the other hand, you're saying we need to protect ourselves by providing this security shield from Greenland.
You're hearing contradictory messages. Elridge Colby, the Pentagon now Deputy Secretary for Policy, his written testimony to Congress says the defense of Taiwan is not worth the cost. I mean, that's a huge. Biden has 4 times said that the US will defend Taiwan. That's a huge thing from the Chinese point of view. So you're hearing all kinds, and yet he has 20% tariffs at the same time. So, frankly, for me, this is a negotiating stage.
Okay.
And much of what you hear from both sides, including tough talk from the Chinese saying trade war, tariff war, any war, we're ready. All that, I think, reflects also attempts to control the negotiation. And so I'd be very careful about jumping to conclusions right now about where he'll take this.
I think it also underlines the great geographic advantage of the United States. Having ocean away from the Eurasian landmass, which is where all the great fights are taking place. So they always had the option of retreating or playing like the British, facilitated regional balance rather than you stay there and take care of the security. So what Trump is saying, look, we don't have to be there. I focus on the hemisphere, that is Western Hemisphere, from Greenland to Panama Canal and further south. I'll regain my dominance, historic Monroe Doctrine type of thing. And then within Eurasia, you let these guys play around and you become the offshore balancer rather than the one control freak who sits in the middle of Europe and in Taiwan Straits and say, look, I'm going to manage everything in the world. He's saying, let go and see how this game plays out. And I think at one level it is.
So if Trump says that, look, I'll take Panama, I'll deal with Canada, right, and Greenland and all that, and tell China, you take Taiwan, I don't care, right, and you do whatever you do in the South China Sea, I don't care. And he tells Russia, you take hold of Moldova, you take hold of the Baltic states, I really don't care. So you have these three spheres of influence, right, and each of them being dominant. And what happens to us?
That's why I said power is still distributed. There are other people with power to make trouble for such an arrangement.
Do they have such power?
I think so. In each region, you find people who will make trouble. And if you look at Northeast Asia, there's Japan, there's Korea, there's North Korea, which also, these are not people who are going to roll over and go join a Sinosphere easily and feel happy. So wherever you look, there are, now you can hand over maybe to a local regional power, which is what the US has done in effect to Israel in West Asia, or at least in the Levant for the last 3 years. But to think that Russia or China or the US can manage West Asia, I don't think so. I don't think they have. And neither can Saudi Arabia, nor Turkey, nor Egypt.
I think
so Iran is, you know, so there are actors. Today, power, that's why I say power is more distributed. That makes it harder.
I think part of the problem is, you know, you say it gives spheres of influence, but the problem is the guys who you want to be, Russia wants Eastern Europe in this sphere of influence. The Eastern Europeans hate the Russians.
Yes, true.
Because of the history of imperialism. So how do you solve that problem? I think that's where the question. Similarly in China, I mean, how much the temptation to bandwagon with China is there. But Chinese say, look, I'll take your territory. I mean, how often can you simply say, look, be my guest? So I think that problem will be there.
But why does the Arab world?
Arab is so fragmented. In a way, today, the competition between the three non-Arab powers, Iran, Israel, and Turkey, are the ones who are shaping the region.
What about Saudi Arabia?
If they come up now, right now, they're not able to. I think that's partly if you have a deal with the Americans where they can play a larger role, then I think something will work out. The fact that they were chosen for the mediation suggests that US and Saudis are going to do some interest. But I have one question.
They have opposed this whole idea of the Palestinians.
But you have to say that to the public. I mean,
no, but they can't accept. I mean,
they can't accept it.
I don't think they'll accept. They can't afford to. What do you say?
No, but what they're negotiating for is something different. They're asking for a 1-2-3 agreement like ours. They want reprocessing and enrichment. They want security guarantees. Then they'll recognize Israel for the Abraham Accords. That gives them the power then to deal with Iran and their neighborhood. I think that's...
So I wanted to ask a question, since the two gentlemen who dealt with South Asia in such a long way, would we like a sphere of influence in South Asia? I mean, is that something you think we can actually get it done?
I think, you know, firstly, if you look at our primary interests, they're much bigger than South Asia. At least I have a bigger idea of India's interests. So, you know, I know this sounds terrible, but it's not about having a control over South Asia. If you think that we can transform India, improve Indian people's lives by controlling South Asia, I'd say you're wrong. Because you're just getting involved in an impossible task.
We don't have,
we have better things
have the economic heft.
We have better things to do, I think, in the world.
Shyam?
Well, a slightly different viewpoint on as far as the neighborhood is concerned. It's not a question of controlling the neighborhood, but I think it is certainly in your interest to reduce your vulnerability in the neighborhood. Because if you leave open spaces, somebody will walk in. So it is important that you should secure your neighborhood, even if it's not controlled. And I have always felt that, you know, India has the economic potential to, because it is the very asymmetry that causes problems in our political relations with our neighbors, that asymmetry itself actually is an asset. Because if you would really open out your market, really open out India to your neighbors, it will be a very small fraction of your market. And you become the engine of growth for the entire region. You become the security provider for the entire region. You have that possibility.
I strongly support that.
Yeah.
Support that.
If you are
I'd
able
do
to
more
do
than
that,
Okay.
if you are able to do that, then the ability to play that larger role that Shankar is talking about, that becomes much more optimal. Otherwise you constantly get dragged back.
What
to
more
the
would you do?
subcontinent.
I think the most important thing is that you are a factor in their domestic politics, whether you like it or not.
Right.
You have to be seen as neutral, and in some ways above it.
But we've not been in the recent past.
Well, the recent past, I mean, you will get dragged in, as he says. I mean, the temptation is always there. But I think it's important that you do that, and that you have some kind of cooperative vision for the larger subcontinent, for your extended neighborhood as a whole.
SARC is a failure.
It's not a failure unless you let it be a failure or you make it a failure. If you let India-Pakistan relations drive SARC, then you're guaranteeing trouble. But that doesn't make sense. To me, you have to do all these. Be a net security provider, be a source of stability in their politics, be a source of prosperity. How did Sri Lanka survive 26 years of civil war with only 1 year of negative growth? Because they were joined to our economy. How do they survive the last 2 years when they defaulted? So you have the ability to work the neighborhood, but you have to give them some kind of broader vision and not a sphere of influence.
So how do we deal with Pakistan and China, if I ask you that question?
Before I get to Pakistan, if you look at the experience that we have had in recent past, one with the Maldives, second with Sri Lanka, third with Nepal. In all these cases, and Bangladesh.
Yes, of course.
In all these cases, at least whether by design or whether it just so happened, we have actually developed very, very dense cross-border linkages. Like for example, the Bangladesh textile industry is unable to survive if it does not get power from India.
That's true.
Maldives came up with India Out campaign, and yet had to, in a sense, retreat because realized that as far as access to essential commodities, the five-star hotels get all their stuff from Dubai and from Singapore. Right. But what about the ordinary Maldivians?
That's right.
They are all entirely dependent upon the cheap food, etc., essential items they get from India. So not always, but I think you can see from your recent experience that those kind of dense interdependencies acts also as some kind of a political stabilizing factor. That is, if the swing of the pendulum would have been this much, maybe it becomes somewhat more limited. And that's, I think, a great, asset for India. So I think we should perhaps take that into account in terms of what we do, taking this
But the Mandarins of South Bloc should be knowing this, no?
I'm sure they do.
With regard to Pakistan, I would only say there is no neighborhood policy which is possible without some, managing of that adversarial relationship with Pakistan. Not that you must become a friend tomorrow, but managing that adversarial relationship is critical to any kind of a neighborhood policy.
No, we need to actually build up bridges with our neighbors, apart from those other neighbors, with both China and Pakistan. And the present policy is saying that we will get back, what belongs to us and which is now occupied by Pakistan. The Pakistan occupied Kashmir, knowing full well that part of Aksai Chin is with the Chinese. How does this help us at all in our relations with the two?
I would say, I think the loosening of the US, China, Russia, the triangular relationship, I think gives us some space. One, in terms of, we got to see how well this goes for the Chinese. If the Russians move, I mean, both of them love sitting with the Americans, so it's not as if they've stabbed each other many times in the past. So it is not certain that they'll stick together forever. So I think the question is, how much advantage can you take in the loosened situation? And second, if the US retrenches from the region, how do we expand our own efforts in partnership with some of the regional powers, whether it's Saudi Arabia, whether it's Japan or Australia? I think we need to do more. Third, I think the problem for us vis-a-vis China is really the power gap. Chinese are 5 times bigger GDP, 4 times larger defense expenditure. So closing that gap, there I think there's still room to work with the Americans, I think. On the technology side, if you see Mr. Modi's visit to Washington, what was laid out there is...
You think Trump is going to give us this technology?
No, I think he's saying that if you want to work on technology, I'm willing to do it. So question is, are we willing to do that?
If you open your markets, open agriculture, I'll give you technology. Can we afford that?
No. Those are not linked. I mean, on trade, I think this also, we are one of the most protected economies. That if we do say, look, I'm not going to change at all internally, but I want a favorable international environment. So I think the key is, can we reform our trade policy? Right now, we're saying we're negotiating with the Americans, with the Europeans, and the Brits, and now with the New Zealanders. I think there's going to be announced. So if there is actually a strategy to reform your trade policy, I think there will be opportunities.
Actually, I think there's a huge opportunity to correct your foreign economic policy. You've heard Commerce Minister now saying we shouldn't be so protectionist.
Right.
Whatever the reason, whether it's because of the Japanese are masters at this. They used to call it gaiatsu. In other words, they use foreign pressure to do the things that they want to do. Yeah. We use crisis to do the things that we know we should do, but we find difficult politically. 1991 is the best example, right? So now is the chance. You walked out of RCP. You are not part of global supply chains.
Which you shouldn't ever have done at that point.
You shouldn't have. I mean, you're not part of global supply chains. Right. You've raised tariffs steadily for 8 years. These are things that if you really want to use the world market and grow and transform India, you can't do these. So this is your chance. Use it. And as he said, as relations improve between China, the US, and Russia, you will have space to do things like this.
Atmanirbhar Bharat has really not worked then.
Well, it depends on how you define it. You know, Atmanirbhar Bharat, if it is...
Protectionism, that's what
well, it need not be protectionism.
It's turned out to be like that.
And it may have, but I'm saying that Atmanirbhar need not necessarily mean protection, because the fact is that you need to build up your capabilities. Without building up your technological capabilities, without developing your economic capabilities, the kind of room for maneuver that we are looking for will not
without investing in R&D.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we have to do that. Now, with the US, I would like to just make a little anxiety that I have. You see, when Trump 1.0 happened, most of the cooperation that we had developed with the United States, say Homeland Security, or with the Pentagon, or with some of the other entities in the United States, there had been a continuity in terms of the personnel who were heading those institutions. Right. So even when there was a change of the presidency, that was not interrupted. It continued quite smoothly, actually. It was some surprise that it actually continued and expanded. What is happening today is that, the whole structure of the state, federal state, is being uprooted. Therefore, who are the people who would be dealing with in terms of, implementing, for example, rather ambitious joint statement? Right. This is something that we will have to, keep in mind, that kind of disruption may also impact adversely on the possibility of actually expanding what has been a very, I think, very profitable, cooperation for us.
Your comments on our way forward with Pakistan and China?
Well, Pakistan, as I mentioned to you, that, you treat Pakistan as any other state.
So you should start talking again, according to
once you make Pakistan a factor in your domestic politics, then it becomes very difficult.
So therefore, start talking to Pakistan.
Yes, I see no reason why.
Start playing cricket with Pakistan.
Actually, this is a good time, because none of their patrons, neither the Chinese, nor the US, nor even the Gulf kingdoms, are actually ready to give that kind of a blank check to Pakistan as they were able to do or ready to do before. That's not.
We should talk. I agree, because today it's in Pakistan's interest to come to some accommodation with us. They have pressure from the West. They're fighting a war with Afghanistan, in practice.
Look what happened in Balochistan.
And
today the India-Pakistan border is the most peaceful border for us.
That ceasefire has held for the last 3 years, because it's in both sides' interest too. So it makes sense, actually, to build on that to a certain extent. But you must assume that not just the jihadi tanzeems, but large parts of the establishment, the army, etc., will stay hostile to you.
That, of course.
And that you have to assume will happen. That doesn't mean you have to hand over the rest of Pakistan to them.
Absolutely.
Because there's ordinary civilians, there's businessmen, there's civilian politicians and so on, who you should be working with. And
you agree that we should be talking?
No, I think we need to, I think what we saw that by cutting off completely, you cede the entire population to the most hostile forces for you. So I think we thought, you could actually, because given the fact that Pakistan is in a deep crisis, today, for example, our GDP is 10 times bigger than Pakistan's. Pakistan has grown at 0% rate in the last 4 years. They're stuck at $350 billion GDP. But I think we have to take the initiative. We did take some initiatives, but I think today, I think there's a hesitation because of probably the domestic reasons. The day you do it, I think you can create some structural change or try to create structural change within Pakistan.
Okay, let's move on to another very interesting topic, and I think that's also very problematic. What's the future of the US-China relationship in the context of the economic war that's taking place?
So I would like to make one or two observations here. One, I disagree with the notion that the US in reaching out to Russia is somehow trying to do a China on the Soviet Union. I don't think that's the case. So even if relations between US and Russia improve, that does not necessarily mean that China-Russia relations will diminish in importance. Don't forget that for China, this huge mass into their north is today like a shield that they have, a geopolitical shield, which enables them to expand further south. That they will not give up very easily. So I do not see, there may be some tactical shifts here and there, but I do not see a fundamental change in that strategic partnership. So even notion here may be that somehow, Russia will become a bigger, better friend for us because they will be able to shift away from China. I think you should not work on that assumption. That is number one. Number two, I think we have to be alert to the fact that for whatever reason, if Trump does make even a kind of a very tactical bargain with China, and this, for example, if what he says about Taiwan, if the US has indicated it's not really interested in Taiwan.
I'm talking about the economic.
But this is important because if Taiwan is, in a sense, ceded to China, Quad has no meaning.
Yes.
This, I think, we should understand.
Right, yes.
So if there is a change in this region, what it will mean in terms of the pressures that we are going to face from China, we have to be alive to that. Because for the United States of America, so far, even in Trump 1.0, because after all, they are the ones who revived the Quad, it was that the Quad was an integral component of the US objective of maintaining its dominance of the Asian Pacific theater, not an offshore balancer.
Yes.
If today, for whatever reason, you become an offshore balancer, then Quad may remain, but it will become only of tactical significance.
I personally think Quad is no longer.
So I think we have to therefore, now in that context, the economic one, I would say it is the time today that you have been pushed to the margins of the Asian economy. Because as you said, we did not join the RCEP, we are no longer a player, IPEF is no longer there under Trump. Therefore, the sooner you actually get back into the game, the economic game, getting back into the RCEP, be bold and even try to get into the, CPTPP, the successor to the TTP. Those are the kind of things which will give you a degree of economic heft and a certain kind of a role, much bigger role in the region. Without that, facing the China challenge may be very difficult.
Just
Please.
I think part of the problem with RCEP has been, today the Southeast Asians were great champions. But today, with China going from 35% to 40% of global manufacturing, they're just dumping goods in Southeast Asia. Today, Indonesia, they're all, Thailand are scrambling to protect their small industries because China's relentless expansion. So I think part of the problem with the Asia First economic diplomacy has been the economies are complementary. I would say actually, if we can succeed in negotiating free trade agreements with US, Europe, and UK, then I think you create a much better balance in terms of your economic capabilities. I would say the priority should be there. But in the end, I think I would say on US-China economic relationship, while Trump wants a deal, the amount of measures that he has taken, every week there is a new, under Biden and under this guy, mounting kind of measures against China. So that's going to be difficult to disentangle in the coming years.
Is there going to be a war of attrition which will continue, or going to have a deal?
The way I see it, they are both going to spend the next 4 or 5 years domestically preoccupied. Because you look at the state, Trump is basically doing a domestic cultural revolution, right? He's trying to remake America. And he has a coalition to do this. It's serious. Xi Jinping has his own issues at home. He's also trying to remake China.
Economy is also not doing that well.
He has economic problems, but more important, he has a society and polity that have been changed by rapid growth, and that he has to learn how to keep single-party rule going in that. So they will both be preoccupied at home. Their relationship, therefore, is determined equally by their trajectory at home as by the 4 Ts, trade, tariffs, Taiwan, and technology. And on technology, on trade, now even on tariffs, there are vested interests on both sides who are entrenched in their economies and in their political decision-making. So, as Raja says, there's only so much space they have. Taiwan is the one issue on which I think he's already, and considering what he did when Hong Kong lost its autonomy, I think the Chinese will probably try their luck and see what they can get out of it. They have another problem, of course, they have the problem of the Taiwanese needing to accept them. So they still have some United Front work to do to actually create the grounds for it. But they'll take what they can get. Real problem is that the US has become unpredictable. If it can change once, it can change again. And so, do you do long-term deals? Do you trust in the future? Or do you just take what you can
We have
and run?
little choice. We have to do a free trade with them. We have to do a free trade with the others.
So that's what you do.
Yes.
So you do what you can get, you get. Take what you can.
It's also an opportunity, because if they impose, say, 40% tariffs on Chinese goods, it's a great opportunity for us.
Right.
So there's an opportunity there as well.
But how long will that last? We don't know. That's the problem, that you can't, nobody can tell you what's going to be there 3 years from now, 5 years from now.
I think the key is really, if you don't reform internally, for all the talk about ease of doing business, it's still such a hard place. I think that's where I think the challenge for us is, unless you change internally, your ability to take advantage of a China plus one, or of the crisis between US and China, that's where I think the challenge is.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think what we need to do is to liberalize our economy at home, and then they will do the rest, if you ask me.
Correct.
Right? Because we have the potential, we have the talent, we have the wherewithal.
But you need to invest in your people.
Of course you have to, but you don't. You don't invest enough in education, you don't invest in health, you don't invest in any of these things. And the MSMEs is really badly hit by all this. Now there's a $5 billion loss to the MSME sector because of the steel.
$5 billion, that's a lot.
That's huge, that's huge. So multilateralism is out. Bilateralism is meaningless. Unilateralism is the order of the day. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. The old order has dismantled. What the new order is going to be, we don't know.
Will there be a new order?
Will there be? What it's going to be, we don't know.
I think on some areas, I think the WTO is dead. I know our Commerce Ministry loves the WTO. We still talk about the principles of WTO. That mantra is over. So I think on economics, quite clearly the old order is dead. And I think you have to do bilateral deals.
Yes.
In fact, you've been negotiating, but you've been in a very slow in negotiating. So I think if you push on the bilateral front with key economic partners, then I think there's some salvation. On the great power side, and there I think we discussed already, that there will be space. It's not that China and Russia will fall apart, but even the loosening that relationship will give Russia a lot of advantages. That they're teasing the American business.
Russia looking for capital from the United
States.
That's what they're
So I think there will be space for us. And I would say finally on the multilateral institutions, political side, look, they don't do much. I mean, to mourn over these institutions, I don't think will get us anywhere.
What should we mourn over, though?
No, I think his question is
Stop moaning and let's go forward. Enough. Let's forget the
taking
past.
over of all democratic institutions and making it an environment in which you must accept what I say. Otherwise, because I know what strength I have, I'll do to you what you have no cards in your hand. I have all the cards.
But I think there is pushback.
But remember, at the end, he said, it makes great television.
There has been pushback.
That you
from
can do.
Kennedys,
Yeah, that's true.
So I think he's willing to negotiate. I think. It's
So we end with this discussion that we really don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Things may change, but the old order is certainly dismantled.
Well, keep your head
And it's
down.
not so
Keep your head down.
Damage
And
as much as you can. And I think this will also open up spaces
right, of course.
for you to, expand.
No, we're a great country, and the kind of market
So
we have.
I don't think we should really see ourselves as being under siege.
But allow the Indian economy to open up. That's
Sure,
fundamental.
sure. And also look for opportunities where if it is shifting, if it is fluid, then there will be
So
spaces.
look for
that you can-
opportunities and, like Trump, be opportunistic.
Yeah. All
Right? Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.